Was a Norman duke really capable of orchestrating a war across the sea, fueled by drunken rage and a papal decree? Could a land-hungry man truly believe Sicily was his destiny, a glittering prize just waiting to be seized? And what if the key to conquering an entire island lay not in brute force, but in a disastrously brilliant scheme involving a treacherous Cade and a very unfortunate storm? The air in 1060 hung thick with the scent of salt, blood, and ambition, a cocktail uniquely suited to the world of Robert Guiscard. Calabria, a jagged scar on the Italian peninsula, had finally yielded to his relentless drive. Byzantine banners, once symbols of defiant power, were reduced to tattered remnants, ghosts of a past that would never again hold sway. But Apulia was a different beast altogether. A stubborn, granite-hearted province, resistant to any attempt at complete domination. 20 years, the chroniclers whispered, would be needed to truly bind this land to the Hauteville dynasty. Yet, Robert wasn't one for patience. He'd built his duchy on a foundation of lavish displays and generous handouts, a potent combination that turned even the most grudging barons into loyal vassals. Gifts, legendary in their extravagance, flowed like wine from his coffers. Peter of Tyre, the former governor of Bisignano, a man once kidnapped and ransomed with a ransom that would make a king blush, now resided in opulent splendor, a testament to Robert's capricious generosity. The Guiscard household, a perpetually mobile encampment, swelled with the spoils of conquest, adopting the decadent trappings of the East Norman knights sporting silks and robes once deemed effeminate, their mesnil transforming into a miniature court worthy of an emperor. But Robert, despite his apparent generosity, was a shrewd and calculating ruler. He didn't simply bestow land, he crafted connections. Small, direct fiefs strategically distributed created a web of personal loyalty, a network of obligations far more resilient than sprawling estates controlled by independent barons. Even Roger, his eldest brother, a man prone to impulsive acts, found himself subject to this peculiar discipline. A generous hand with money, a sparing one with power, that was Robert's method, a carefully calibrated dance of influence. Then, the whispers began, Sicily. That shimmering jewel across the Straits of Messina, a prize that had haunted the Norman dreams for decades. The memory of the disastrous Maniacs expedition in 1042, a brutal defeat at the hands of the Saracens, still cast a long shadow. But now, with Reggio and the Calabrian coastline firmly under Norman control, the prospect of reclaiming the island seemed tantalizingly within reach, and Robert wasn't alone in his ambition. The Church, a tempestuous entity in the midst of a schism with Constantinople, fueled the flames of zealotry. A license to reconquer bestowed by the Pope himself, a divine mandate conveniently aligning with Robert's own desires. It was a potent combination, a heady blend of piety and greed. But the road to Sicily wasn't paved with divine favor. It was choked with political intrigue and simmering rivalries. The island was a fractured landscape, ruled by four feuding Cades, leaders of independent territories, locked in a perpetual cycle of violence. Tunis and Agrigento were dominated by Berber tribes, while the eastern regions were controlled by Arab families. The last emir of the Calbite dynasty had been deposed in 1053, plunging the island into chaos. Amidst this turmoil, a figure emerged who would prove to be a pivotal player, Ibn Timna, the Cade of Syracuse. A man known more for his ruthlessness than his diplomacy, he'd seized power through bloodshed, claiming the throne by murdering his predecessor and absconding with his wife, Maimona. A twisted romance fueled by vengeance and ambition. Ibn Timna's feud with his brother-in-law, Ibn Hawaz, the Cade of Agrigento, escalated into a full-blown war, a brutal dance of betrayal and retribution. It was during this desperate struggle that Ibn Timna, seeking an alliance against his common enemy, turned to the Norman brothers. He offered his services, a treacherous proposition that would forever alter the course of Sicilian history. Roger, ever the impetuous one, seized upon the offer with characteristic enthusiasm. He'd already attempted a daring raid on Messina, a brief, audacious foray across the straits that ended in a humiliating retreat. But this time, he envisioned something bolder, a full-scale invasion designed to seize control of the island. Robert, however, was preoccupied with a crisis brewing in Apulia. The Byzantines, roused from their slumber by the Norman successes, launched a furious counterattack. Taranto, Brindisi, Oria, and Otranto fell swiftly to the imperial forces, and Robert's own army was routed at Manchuria. Melfi, the heart of his newly conquered territory, was besieged. The situation in Apulia demanded Robert's immediate attention. He couldn't afford to divert his resources to a distant campaign, not while the Byzantine army threatened to strangle his duchy. He entrusted the Sicilian venture to Roger, a decision that would prove to be fraught with peril. But Roger, fueled by ambition and a disregard for caution, pressed ahead with his preparations. He assembled a formidable force, 150 knights, 450 auxiliaries, a motley crew of Norman warriors and local mercenaries. A fleet of ships hastily assembled from the ports of Reggio and other Calabrian towns, prepared to cross the treacherous straits of Messina. The initial phase of the invasion was a resounding success. The Norman knights, emboldened by their recent victories, landed unopposed near Milazzo, a coastal town in northern Sicily. They rampaged through the countryside, plundering villages and collecting vast quantities of loot. The governor of Messina, lured by the promise of riches, was ambushed and slain in a brutal duel, cementing Roger's reputation as a ruthless warrior. But the Norman advance was abruptly halted by a sudden and devastating storm. The sea, once a pathway to conquest, transformed into a raging torrent, trapping the Norman fleet in a narrow bay. For 3 days and nights, the soldiers endured the elements, exposed to the wind, rain, and the constant threat of attack. Just as despair began to set in, a stroke of unexpected fortune intervened. A Muslim fleet attempting to intercept the Norman ships clashed with the remaining Norman vessels, scattering the enemy and clearing the way for a desperate retreat. Roger, battered but not broken, managed to return to Reggio with his surviving forces and a considerable haul of plunder. The raid had been a qualified success, a testament to Norman audacity and resilience, but it was far from a decisive victory. Meanwhile, Robert faced a far more pressing challenge in Apulia. The Byzantine counteroffensive continued unabated, tightening its grip on the region. The Norman barons, long accustomed to operating independently, began to question Robert's authority, fueling a series of rebellions that threatened to unravel his carefully constructed dominion. Perennos, the Byzantine Duke of Durazzo, and his field commander, Abulcaire, proved to be formidable adversaries. They exploited the barons' grievances, offering incentives for rebellion and ruthlessly suppressing any attempts at resistance. The Normans, short on manpower and lacking experience in large-scale warfare, struggled to contain the unrest. The situation in Apulia became increasingly precarious. Robert's soldiers were accused of brutality, burning towns and deporting populations, a tactic that further alienated the local populace. The Latin Church, while supportive of Robert's ambitions, expressed concern over his appointment of Latin bishops with minimal consultation, accusing him of undermining the authority of the church elders. As Robert grappled with the challenges in Apulia, Roger pressed onward with his plans for Sicily. He dispatched a small force to Messina, aiming to establish a permanent foothold on the island. But the attempt was thwarted by a well-defended garrison, forcing Roger to withdraw in disarray. The Norman campaign in Sicily was a gamble, a desperate attempt to seize a prize that had eluded them for centuries. But Robert and Roger were not men to be deterred by setbacks. They had tasted the fruits of conquest, and the lure of Sicily was too strong to resist. The winter of 1061 brought a new twist to the narrative. Ibn Timna, now a fugitive and a traitor, sought refuge in Malto, offering Robert a proposition that would forever alter the course of the Norman-Byzantine conflict. He proposed an alliance, a treacherous bargain that would see the Normans invade Sicily in his name, with the promise of a share of the spoils. Robert, ever pragmatic, accepted the offer, recognizing the strategic value of a foothold in Sicily. It was a risky move, one that could expose his duchy to further attacks from the Byzantines and the Saracens. But the potential rewards, control of a wealthy and strategically important island, outweighed the risks. The invasion force assembled in the spring of 1062 was larger and more formidable than the previous expedition. Serlo, Robert's nephew, a young and ambitious warrior, joined the expedition, eager to prove his worth. The Normans landed near Silla, a strategic location that allowed them to bypass the heavily fortified city of Messina. They quickly subdued the surrounding countryside, plundering villages and collecting tribute. But their advance was soon halted by a Byzantine counterattack, forcing them to retreat to their ships. The Norman fleet was scattered by a sudden storm, trapping the soldiers on the beach. For 3 days and nights they endured the elements, exposed to the wind, rain, and the threat of attack. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm them, a Muslim fleet intervened, driving off the Byzantine forces and clearing the way for a desperate retreat. Roger, battered but not broken, returned to Reggio with his surviving forces and a considerable amount of plunder. The raid had been a costly failure, a testament to Norman ambition and a reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. Yet, the Norman dream of Sicily remained alive. Robert, despite the setbacks in Apulia, continued to pursue his ambitions, recognizing that the conquest of the island was essential to the long-term stability of his duchy. And so, the stage was set for a protracted and bloody conflict, a clash of civilizations that would reshape the destiny of Sicily and leave an indelible mark on the history of southern Italy. The storm had passed, but the winds of war were still howling, carrying the scent of salt, blood, and the relentless pursuit of power. But what if Robert Guiscard hadn't been driven by ambition alone? What if he'd truly sought to establish a just and prosperous realm in Sicily, a bridge between East and West, a haven for trade and learning? Could his legacy have been one of enlightenment rather than conquest? And finally, as the Norman ships turned their prow towards the horizon, carrying with them the hopes and dreams of a new dynasty, could it be argued that the greatest victory wasn't the capture of a kingdom, but the very audacity of the attempt?